Here's a question most people never actually sit down and answer. Who is really in charge of your thoughts? You'd probably say, I am, almost instinctively. But watch yourself for a single day. Every worry that hijacks your focus, every doubt that talks you out of trying, every scroll session that steals an hour you never meant to give away, and the honest answer starts to look a lot less certain. Napoleon Hill spent his life studying the men and women who built empires out of nothing, and he arrived at a conclusion that sounds almost too simple to be revolutionary. The people who succeed aren't smarter, luckier, or more talented than everyone else. They've simply learned to own their own mind, instead of renting it out to fear, doubt, and other people's opinions. Today we're unpacking exactly how they did it, the difference between the two kinds of imagination that built everything from the light bulb to the telephone, why organized thinking might be the most underrated skill in existence, and a 5-factor formula so powerful Hill called it mental dynamite. Stay to the end, because that final formula is the one piece of this entire framework you can start using in the next 5 minutes. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. Your mind is the real battlefield. Before we get into any specific technique, it's worth sitting with an uncomfortable idea. Your mind can be your own worst enemy. Not other people. Not circumstances. Not bad luck. The voice inside your own head that talks you out of the attempt before you've even made it. This isn't meant to sound bleak, it's meant to be liberating, because if the biggest obstacle standing between you and what you want is internal, that also means it's something you can actually work with. You can't control the economy. You can't control other people's decisions. But you absolutely can learn to direct your own thinking, and that single shift in where you place your effort changes everything downstream. Think about how often you've heard advice like just think positive and felt a flicker of irritation. There's a reason that advice falls flat for most people. It treats positivity as a decision you make once, rather than a skill you build through specific, repeatable practices. Telling someone to just think positive is a bit like telling someone to just get stronger, without ever mentioning that strength comes from lifting weights consistently, not from wanting it badly enough. What Napoleon Hill offers instead is something far more useful than a slogan. It's a structure. A way of actually organizing your thoughts, directing your attention, and using your imagination on purpose, rather than letting your mind run on autopilot while life happens to you. Because here's the pattern Hill noticed again and again while studying history's most accomplished people. They weren't immune to fear or doubt. They simply refused to let fear and doubt make decisions on their behalf. Here's the imagine beat. Picture two people receiving the exact same piece of bad news. A rejection, a setback, a plan falling through. One person's mind immediately spirals into, I knew this wouldn't work, I'm not cut out for this. The other person's mind, trained through deliberate practice, redirects almost automatically, okay, what does this teach me, and what's the next move? Same event. Same initial sting. But one person's mind works against them, and the other's works for them, and that difference was built, not born. So where does this deliberate mental ownership actually begin? According to Hill, it starts somewhere most people don't expect. Not with discipline, not with willpower, but with imagination. Chapter 2. What creative vision actually means. Say the phrase creative vision out loud, and most people's minds jump straight to painters, poets, or musicians, as if vision were reserved for people with an artistic gift. But the industrialist Andrew Carnegie, one of the wealthiest men of his era, insisted the opposite. Creative vision isn't an artistic luxury. It's a practical skill, and it belongs in every single field, from steel manufacturing to running a bakery to building a career you actually want. Carnegie's definition is refreshingly simple. Creative vision is the ability to recognize an opportunity and act on it. Notice what's missing from that definition. There's no mention of talent, no mention of luck, no requirement of a creative personality type. It's a two-part skill. First, you have to actually see the opportunity, which most people miss simply because they aren't looking. And second, you have to act on it, which is where most people who do see the opportunity still fail, because seeing without acting is just an interesting thought that goes nowhere. At the center of this skill sits imagination, and this is where Hill's framework gets genuinely useful, because he doesn't treat imagination as one vague, mystical thing. He splits it into two distinct types, and understanding the difference changes how you approach almost any problem you'll ever face. The first type is synthetic imagination, and despite the technical sounding name, the concept is remarkably intuitive. Synthetic imagination takes ideas and principles that already exist and rearranges them into something new. It doesn't invent from nothing, it recombines. And here's the reassuring part. In a world where, realistically, almost nothing is completely original anymore, synthetic imagination is available to absolutely everyone, because the raw materials, existing ideas, are already all around you. The second type is creative imagination, the rarer, harder to explain form, where a genuinely new idea seems to arrive out of nowhere. This is the kind of imagination artists describe when they say they don't know where a lyric or a plot came from, it simply appeared. Creative imagination is less predictable, less controllable, and honestly, less necessary for most practical goals than people assume. Most breakthroughs, in business, in careers, in personal problem solving, come from the first type, not the second. Here's the imagine beat. Picture every idea you've ever had as a mental toolbox. Creative imagination is like forging a brand new tool from raw metal, rare, unpredictable, and honestly, not something you can force on demand. Synthetic imagination is like taking two tools you already own and combining them into something more useful than either alone. A hammer and a wrench welded together into something nobody had quite built before. One requires a spark you can't summon at will. The other requires only a willingness to look at what already exists and ask, what if I combine this with that? And there's no better illustration of synthetic imagination in action than the story of a single light bulb. Chapter 3, The Light Bulb That Wasn't Really Invented from Scratch. Here's a piece of history that gets flattened into a single sentence in most retellings. Edison invented the light bulb. Simple, tidy, and almost entirely missing the actual lesson. Edison didn't invent electricity. He didn't invent the electric lamp. Both of those things already existed and were already being used, imperfectly, before he ever touched them. What existed specifically was a lamp that used a thin wire connected to electric current, which produced a glowing white light, but burned out almost immediately, because the metal wire simply couldn't withstand the heat for long. Everyone working in this space at the time was staring at the same broken piece of the puzzle. The light worked, but it didn't last. Edison's breakthrough wasn't a flash of pure creative genius arriving from nowhere. It was synthetic imagination in its purest form. He took the existing principle of electric current and combined it with an entirely different existing material, charcoal, which could withstand heat and burn for far longer than the fragile wire filament. Two old, already known pieces, recombined into something the world hadn't quite assembled yet. That recombination is what powered lamps for years afterward. Here's what makes this story more than just a historical footnote. It's a completely repeatable method. Ask yourself, what are two existing tools, ideas, or approaches in your own field that nobody has quite combined yet? You don't need a laboratory or a research budget to practice synthetic imagination. You need curiosity about what already exists, and a willingness to ask, what if I put this together with that? Compare that to creative imagination, the type Edison himself couldn't fully explain when asked directly where the idea to use charcoal actually came from. In interview after interview, his honest answer amounted to, he simply had the idea, and then acted on it. That's the frustrating, slightly mysterious nature of creative imagination. It doesn't arrive on command, and even the people who experience it can't always trace its origin. This is precisely why he'll spend so much more time teaching people how to stimulate their imagination deliberately, rather than waiting passively for creative lightning to strike. Because you can't schedule inspiration. But you absolutely can build the conditions that make synthetic imagination, the reliable, repeatable kind, far more likely to show up when you need it. So what are those conditions? Hill lays out 5 specific principles, and each one acts like a different lever you can pull to get your imagination moving. Chapter 4. 5 levers that stimulate imagination. The first lever is definiteness of purpose. Simply put, being genuinely clear about what you're trying to achieve. This sounds almost too basic to matter, but consider how rarely people actually operate with a specific target in mind, versus a vague, foggy sense of, I should probably be doing more. A clear purpose focuses your imagination the way a magnifying glass focuses sunlight. Diffuse effort produces almost nothing, but concentrated effort, aimed at a specific target, can ignite something. And here's a detail Hill doesn't shy away from. The thought of financial benefit is a completely legitimate stimulant for imagination. Money isn't a shallow motivator to be embarrassed about. It genuinely makes life easier, and acknowledging that honestly tends to sharpen focus rather than cheapen it. The second lever is what Hill calls the mastermind principle, bringing together a group of people around a shared table, working toward the same specific goal. There's something almost chemical that happens when several minds focus on one problem simultaneously. Ideas that wouldn't occur to any single person in isolation tend to emerge from the friction and combination of multiple perspectives. This is why the best solutions in business rarely come from a lone genius locked in a room. They come from focused collaboration. The third lever is going the extra mile, doing more than what's strictly required, specifically in an area you're genuinely passionate about. Picture someone who loves animals so deeply that rescuing them becomes a driving force in how they spend their free time. That depth of care doesn't just produce more effort, it produces more imaginative effort, because passion makes people notice angles and opportunities that someone merely going through the motions would walk right past. The fourth lever is applied faith, genuine belief, whatever form it takes for you personally, functioning as fuel for imagination. History offers no shortage of examples of people who accomplished extraordinary things because their faith gave them a kind of certainty that carried them through the moments when evidence alone wasn't yet enough to justify continuing. The fifth lever is organized individual endeavor, a direct, structured approach to actually building or creating something, rather than leaving imagination to wander unfocused. This is, again, exactly the mode Edison operated in with the light bulb. Not passively waiting for inspiration, but actively, systematically working the problem until a combination clicked into place. Here's the imagine beat. Picture your imagination as a fire that needs specific kindling to catch. A vague wish for more creativity is like trying to light wet wood. It just won't take. But definiteness of purpose, a mastermind conversation, genuine passion, real conviction, and structured effort, that's dry kindling, arranged correctly, ready for a single spark to catch and spread. Once your imagination is generating ideas, though, a new problem emerges. Because raw ideas, unfiltered and unstructured, are almost useless on their own. What separates a good idea from a good decision is what happens next, how you organize your thinking around it. Chapter 5. The difference between inductive and deductive thought. Here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. Have you ever actually thought about how you think? Not what you think about, but the actual mechanism, the pattern your mind follows when it moves from observation to conclusion. Most people never examine this. They simply accept whatever thought pattern arrives, without questioning whether it's actually reliable. Hill breaks organized thought into 2 distinct modes. The first is inductive reasoning, drawing conclusions based on accepting facts you haven't directly confirmed. If the sky looks dark and overcast, you grab an umbrella before heading out, even though you haven't personally verified that rain is imminent. You're reasoning from an unconfirmed but reasonable pattern. The second is deductive reasoning, building conclusions strictly from facts you actually know to be true. If someone is unmarried, calling them a bachelor isn't speculation. It follows directly and logically from a confirmed fact. Here's where this distinction becomes genuinely important. Deductive reasoning, built on confirmed facts, doesn't leave much room for opinion, and that's exactly the point. Opinions are slippery. They masquerade as facts constantly, and untangling the two is one of the most underrated mental skills you can develop, because an opinion mistaken for a fact can quietly steer an entire decision in the wrong direction without you ever noticing the substitution happened. Why are opinions so unreliable? Because they're almost always biased, frequently built on incomplete information, and shaped more by emotion or self-interest than by careful analysis. That doesn't mean opinions are worthless. It means they need to be handled with far more scrutiny than most people give them, especially their own. Here's the imagined beat. Picture two people receiving the same piece of advice from a well-meaning friend. One accepts it immediately, simply because it was said with confidence. The other pauses and asks a quieter internal question. Is this actually based on something verifiable, or is this just how my friend feels about it today? That second person isn't being rude or dismissive. They're protecting the quality of their own decisions from being quietly hijacked by someone else's unexamined bias. So if opinions are this unreliable, does that mean you should ignore everyone's advice and go it entirely alone? Not quite, and the nuance here matters enormously. Chapter 6. Free advice, trusted sources, and thinking for yourself opinions, Hill argues, can absolutely be trusted, but only under one specific condition, when they're actually grounded in fact rather than pure feeling. This distinction sounds subtle, but it changes everything about how you should listen to the people around you. Consider someone who has an opinion about everything in every conversation, but consistently makes sure those opinions trace back to something verifiable, rather than simply reacting emotionally in the moment. That habit of grounding opinion in fact is what separates a genuinely useful voice in your life from noise that merely sounds confident. There's also real value in what you might call free advice, the guidance of people who know you well and have your genuine interest at heart. When facing a major decision, it's not weakness to consult a partner, a close friend, or a parent. The key isn't whether you listen, it's how you listen. Taking advice at face value without scrutiny is different from genuinely weighing it, testing it against what you already know, and deciding for yourself whether it fits your situation. The people who make the best decisions aren't the ones who never seek outside input. They're the ones who seek it and still retain final ownership of the conclusion. The same principle extends to how you consume information more broadly. It's worth periodically questioning your sources, not out of paranoia, but as basic mental hygiene. Someone who follows the news but takes the extra step of verifying that a source is credible, well-established, and free from an obvious slant is protecting their thinking in a way that someone who absorbs headlines uncritically simply isn't. Different outlets can report the exact same event through wildly different framings, and being selective about which voices you actually let shape your understanding is not closed-mindedness, it's precision. Here's the underlying discipline beneath all of this. Keep gathering information until you're genuinely convinced something is grounded in fact, rather than settling for the first confident-sounding version you encounter. This takes real, sustained effort. Organized thinking doesn't arrive as a personality trait you either have or don't. It's a controlled habit, and like every controlled habit, it has to be built. Which raises the obvious next question: how exactly do you build it? Chapter 7. The camera metaphor and how controlled habits actually form. Here's a mental image worth holding onto for the rest of your life. Think of your mind as a camera with an enormous amount of storage space. Left unmanaged, that camera doesn't discriminate. It captures everything within range. Useless gossip, trivial distractions, whatever propaganda happens to be loudest in a given moment. None of it filtered, all of it stored, competing for the same limited attention your important thoughts also need. A controlled habit is what gives that camera focus. It's the difference between a lens capturing everything indiscriminately and one that can zoom precisely onto a single rare bird among thousands of ordinary trees, deliberately storing only what actually matters, and letting the rest pass through unrecorded. But here's the trap most people fall into when trying to build this kind of focus. They confuse wanting something with actually doing the work to get it. Consider someone who complains about their weight, decides to become more aware of their health, and then changes nothing. Still eating the same food. Still following the same routine. Still living in the same environment that produced the problem in the first place. The desire was genuine. But desire alone isn't a controlled habit. It's just a wish wearing the costume of intention. Real controlled habits require willpower applied consistently, and they're built through two distinct kinds of repetition. The first is physical repetition, actually doing the behavior over and over until it stops requiring conscious effort. If you want to think more critically, for example, physical repetition looks like consistently researching claims rather than accepting them at face value again and again, until skepticism becomes automatic rather than exhausting. The second is mental repetition, and this one surprises people because it sounds almost too simple to matter: affirmation. There's a well-documented historical figure, a psychologist who built an entire method around a single repeated phrase: day by day, in every way, I am getting better and better. On the surface, that sentence might sound almost childish to repeat daily. But anyone who genuinely understands how much repeated thought shapes behavior over time won't dismiss it so quickly, because the mind tends to move toward whatever it's fed most consistently, whether that diet is doubt or confidence. Consider someone finally working up the courage to open a small business built entirely around a lifelong passion. Starting the business demanded resources, planning, and sustained effort over a long stretch of time. So the work got broken into a manageable list, tackled one task per day, showing definiteness of purpose in action. But alongside that physical repetition, daily affirmations reinforced the belief that success was actually possible, and reminded a discouraged mind, again and again, that meaningful progress takes patience. On the hardest days, it was that habit of affirmation, not raw willpower alone, that kept the momentum alive. There's a broader principle sitting underneath all of this, sometimes called the law of attraction, though it's less mystical than the name suggests. Whatever energy you consistently put out tends to circle back toward you. Approach situations with a habitually bright outlook, and you tend to notice and create more positive openings. Approach everything with dread, and dread tends to compound the same way. Here's the imagine beat. Picture your daily thoughts as seeds scattered across the exact same patch of soil day after day for years. Plant doubt repeatedly, and doubt is what eventually grows thick enough to choke out everything else. Plant deliberate, repeated confidence instead, and that's what takes root over time. Neither happens overnight. Both happen, eventually, through nothing more dramatic than repetition. Organized thought and controlled habits give your mind direction and discipline. But there's one more ingredient Hill considered so powerful, he gave it a name that sounds almost explosive on purpose. Chapter 8, Mental Dynamite. The Power of Controlled Attention. Napoleon Hill had a specific term for controlled attention, and it wasn't subtle: mental dynamite. Not because it's dramatic or flashy, but because of the sheer force it's capable of releasing once properly directed. The same way dynamite itself does nothing on a shelf, but becomes enormously powerful the instant it's aimed at a specific target. Controlled attention, according to Hill, is capable of dissolving self-doubt almost entirely, not by arguing doubt away through willpower alone, but by simply not leaving it room to operate, because every ounce of mental energy is already occupied elsewhere, aimed at something productive. To actually achieve this state, Hill identifies 5 specific factors that work together, each reinforcing the others: definiteness of purpose, self-discipline, controlled attention itself, autosuggestion, and willpower. Individually, each of these sounds familiar, almost like standard self-help vocabulary. But watch what happens when Hill applies all 5 simultaneously to a single concrete situation, because that's where the framework stops sounding abstract and starts sounding like an actual instruction manual. Picture someone facing real financial pressure, rent due at the end of the month, with no obvious source of the money yet in sight. The default response for most people in that position is simply to stress about it without taking any structured action, letting anxiety occupy the space where a plan should be. Definiteness of purpose changes the starting point entirely, a clear decision to gather the necessary money, rather than a vague hope that things will somehow work out. That single decision immediately reshapes where attention goes, toward productive options, rather than toward hours of anxious scrolling that solve nothing. Self-discipline enters next, specifically as emotional control, refusing to let fear of failure take over before any actual attempt has even been made. This doesn't mean pretending the situation isn't difficult. It means not allowing the difficulty to become an excuse for inaction. Controlled attention itself is the factor that gathers everything else together, concentrating the majority of available time and mental energy specifically on solving this one problem, rather than letting focus scatter across a dozen unrelated worries. Autosuggestion shows up as active brainstorming, actively prompting your own mind to generate options rather than passively waiting for a solution to appear. Someone skilled at fixing things might start asking neighbors if anything around their homes needs repair. Someone good at math might offer to tutor. Autosuggestion, in this sense, is simply the mind's way of proving to itself that a problem can be approached from many more angles than the first, most obvious one. And finally, willpower, the raw persistence to keep going even after early attempts fail. The first several neighbors approached might say no. That's not proof the plan has failed. It's simply data on the way to finding the person who eventually says yes. Willpower is what keeps someone making the next attempt instead of stopping at the first rejection. Here's the imagine beat. Picture 5 separate gears, each individually capable of turning, but only truly powerful once they're locked together and turning in sync. Purpose alone drifts without discipline. Discipline alone burns out without sustained attention. Attention alone runs dry without fresh ideas from autosuggestion. And even brilliant ideas go nowhere without the willpower to keep pushing after the first setback. Together, these 5 gears are what Hill meant by mental dynamite. This exact combination, it turns out, isn't limited to hypothetical examples about rent money. It's the same formula history's most famous inventors quietly followed, whether or not they ever used Hill's specific vocabulary for it. Chapter 9. How Edison and Bell actually used this formula. When Edison was asked directly to name the single most essential ingredient in the field of invention, his answer lines up almost perfectly with Hill's 5 factors, even though he wasn't necessarily using the same terminology. He emphasized, first and most forcefully, being genuinely clear about what you're trying to achieve, definiteness of purpose in its purest form. From there, Edison described what controlled attention and autosuggestion actually feel like from the inside, becoming so completely fixated on a goal that the concept of impossible stops registering as a meaningful obstacle. People with genuinely controlled attention, in Edison's description, stay locked onto what they need, invest real time and effort into mastering their specific craft, and deliberately seek out other people who share their focus rather than isolating themselves. Crucially, they don't let failure, obstacles, or self-doubt function as stopping points, which is really just willpower, described from a slightly different angle. Edison also pointed out something that applies to nearly everyone who's ever abandoned a goal early. Most people give up before they genuinely start. They quietly set limits on themselves in advance, deciding a goal is unrealistic before making any real attempt at all, meaning the failure happens entirely in the mind, long before there's any external evidence to justify it. Alexander Graham Bell's story reinforces the same pattern from a different angle. Bell didn't invent the telephone on his first attempt, or his second, or anywhere close. By his own account, he genuinely lost count of how many times he failed along the way. Was that discouraging? Absolutely. There's no use pretending repeated failure doesn't sting. Did it stop him from continuing to try? Not even close. He kept going until sound successfully transmitted through a wire, and that persistence, sustained across an uncounted number of failed attempts, is willpower in its most concrete, historically documented form. Here's the Imagine beat. Picture Bell after his 50th failed attempt, with no guarantee that attempt 51 would be any different. From the outside, at that exact moment, there was no visible proof that success was coming. The only thing distinguishing that moment from a permanent dead end was a decision to try once more. Multiply that decision across however many additional attempts it actually took, and you have the entire mechanism behind an invention that changed how the world communicates. These 5 factors clearly worked at the individual level, for inventors solving isolated technical problems. But Hill's framework doesn't stop there. Andrew Carnegie extended the exact same principle of controlled attention into an entirely different arena, building a career and a specialization. Chapter 10. Controlled Attention as a Career Strategy. Andrew Carnegie held controlled attention in extraordinarily high regard, describing it as something anyone in any field could apply to become successful in that specific area. His own explanation of the concept was elegantly simple. Controlled attention means combining every available capability of the mind toward one single purpose, rather than spreading that capability thin across many competing directions. In Carnegie's own life, this looked like relentless specialization. When his work centered on manufacturing and selling steel, every relevant part of his mind was aimed at steel, not diluted across a dozen unrelated ventures. His argument is direct. Specialization increases your odds of success, because focused effort in one domain compounds in a way that scattered effort across many domains simply cannot. A reasonable objection follows naturally. What about industries that seem to thrive on variety rather than narrow focus? Retail, for instance, with entirely separate departments for sports equipment, clothing, and everything in between. Carnegie's answer is that controlled attention doesn't disappear in these environments. It simply operates at a more granular level. A clothing department still needs someone whose focused expertise is specifically clothing. A sporting goods department still needs someone whose specialized knowledge covers exactly that category. The organization as a whole may look diverse from the outside, but underneath that diversity sits a structure built entirely from individually specialized, tightly focused attention. This same pattern holds inside corporate structures more broadly. A human resources manager doesn't casually absorb the responsibilities of a chief financial officer. An accounting employee doesn't drift into handling sales tasks. Each role represents its own pocket of controlled attention, and the overall organization functions well precisely because those pockets stay clearly defined rather than blurring into one another. But what if you genuinely don't know yet which field deserves your focused attention? Carnegie's advice here is reassuring rather than alarming. Carefully decide where to invest your time and effort, and let a broader sense of your life's major purpose guide that decision, even if the specific specialization isn't obvious yet. Consider someone still in college, studying one subject, while quietly suspecting their actual career won't follow that exact path. Time spent finishing that degree isn't wasted just because the eventual specialization ends up somewhere else entirely. It can still shape how effectively that person eventually communicates, collaborates, or leads, once their real focus becomes clear. Sometimes a person spends years developing expertise in one direction, then discovers a different calling entirely, perhaps realizing their deeper motivation was always to help people directly, which leads toward an entirely different profession. The original years aren't wasted in that scenario either. They become part of a broader foundation that makes the eventual specialization stronger, not weaker. And here's a reassurance worth holding on to if you're still searching for your specific focus. Time spent without a locked-in specialization isn't automatically wasted time. It can be genuinely well spent developing broader capabilities, communication, teamwork, self-discipline, skills that will serve whatever specialization eventually emerges. Changing direction entirely, even after years invested in one path, isn't inherently a mistake either. Passions shift. What would actually be the greater waste isn't switching paths late. It's staying permanently on a path you no longer believe in, purely because you've already invested time in it. Here's the Imagine beat. Picture controlled attention not as a single spotlight that only works in isolation, but as something scalable, a single spotlight for one inventor solving one problem, or dozens of coordinated spotlights across an entire organization, each one focused precisely on its own territory. The scale changes. The underlying principle, deliberate, undiluted focus, stays exactly the same. Which brings us to the final unifying question underneath everything we've covered. What happens once you actually combine creative vision, organized thought, and controlled attention into a single coherent approach to your own life? Chapter 11. What actually changes once you own your mind? Here's the thread connecting everything we've walked through. Creative vision gives you the raw material, the recombined ideas, the recognized opportunities. Organized thought filters that raw material, separating grounded fact from unreliable opinion, so your decisions rest on something solid rather than borrowed noise. And controlled attention aims all of that focused energy at one purpose long enough for it to actually produce results, rather than dissipating across a dozen half-finished efforts. None of these three pieces work particularly well in isolation. Vision without organized thought produces exciting ideas built on shaky assumptions. Organized thought without controlled attention produces careful, well-reasoned plans that never quite get executed. And controlled attention without vision produces relentless focus aimed at the wrong target entirely. Ownership of your mind means all three operating together, each one reinforcing the others. There's a deeper question sitting underneath all of this, one worth asking honestly rather than rhetorically. What is the actual purpose behind your existence? Not in some abstract, philosophical sense, but practically, specifically, in terms of what you're actually building your days toward. Once that answer becomes genuinely clear, something shifts. Effort stops feeling like something you have to force yourself into and starts feeling like something you're naturally pulled toward, because every piece of the framework we've covered finally has a specific target to organize around. Here's the final imagine beat. Picture your mind before any of this as a room full of scattered tools, useful individually, but disorganized, half-buried under clutter, impossible to find quickly when you actually need them. Now picture that same room after everything we've discussed has been applied. Every tool has a place, every project has a clear purpose, and your attention moves directly to exactly what's needed, without wasting time digging through the noise. Nothing about the room's contents changed. What changed was ownership, the deliberate decision to organize what was always there, rather than leaving it scattered and half-used. That's the entire premise beneath the title of this book, distilled into a single idea. You already have everything required to think clearly, imagine boldly, and focus with real force. The only missing piece was ever the deliberate decision to actually own it. Let's bring everything back together. Creative vision taught us that opportunity isn't reserved for the naturally gifted. It's built through synthetic imagination, recombining what already exists, stimulated by clear purpose, collaboration, passion, conviction, and structured effort. Organized thought taught us to separate confirmed fact from unreliable opinion, and to build genuine mental discipline through repetition, both physical and mental. And controlled attention, Hill's Mental Dynamite, showed us the definiteness of purpose, self-discipline, focused concentration, active autosuggestion, and unshakable willpower, applied together, can move almost any obstacle, whether that obstacle is overdue rent, a telephone that refuses to transmit sound, or a career path that hasn't found its direction yet. Here's the challenge to actually walk away with. Don't try to apply all 5 factors of controlled attention tomorrow morning. Pick one. Maybe it's writing down, in one clear sentence, the actual purpose behind something you've been vaguely working toward. Maybe it's catching the next opinion you hear, including your own, and quietly asking whether it's actually grounded in fact. Maybe it's simply choosing one thing to give your full, undivided attention to for the next hour, with nothing else allowed to compete for that space. Whichever you choose, that single deliberate act is the beginning of owning your own mind, not as a one-time decision, but as a habit repeated daily, The same way every principle in this script was ultimately built through repetition, rather than a single dramatic moment of willpower. If this breakdown gave you something worth applying, hit like, subscribe to Gollari Books for more deep dives like this one, and drop a comment telling us, which of the 5 factors, purpose, discipline, attention, autosuggestion, or willpower, do you personally need to strengthen the most right now? We read every comment, and we genuinely love to know where you're starting. Until next time, own your mind, and everything else starts to follow.